My name is Rene Rodgers, and I am the head curator here at the Birthplace of Country Music Museum. Like I said, this is our first of the virtual speaker series, and we are very glad to have Paula here with us. Paula Johnson is a curator, project director, and public historian in the Division of Work and Industry at the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History in Washington, D.C. She is responsible for the food technology and marine resources collections and is the project director and co-curator for the exhibition Food, Transforming the American Table, which opened in 2012. Johnson was one of the curators who collected the home kitchen of Julia Child in 2001 and developed the exhibition Bon Appetit, Julia Child's Kitchen at the Smithsonian. Paula also directed and co-curated the long-term exhibition On the Water, Stories from Maritime America, which opened to the public in 2009 and was the curator for several components of the permanent exhibition America on the Move, both on view at the National Museum of American History. She holds degrees in English, a BA, and folklore anthropology, MA, and has published books and articles on the fisheries of the Chesapeake Bay, traditional watercraft, maritime communities, and food and museums. Johnson has worked at the Smithsonian since 1991 and in museums since 1981. Welcome, Paula. We're so glad to have you here with us.
Thank you, Renee. It's wonderful to be here, and thanks to everyone for tuning in. Renee, I really hope to visit your museum someday. I would really love to be in 2021, so maybe it'll happen. I don't know.
Yes, and when you come down here as food history curator, you'll have to have a rendition of How Many Biscuits Can You Eat played for you to like tie into your food history.
Okay, this morning, this evening, right now.
Yes. So we'll start off and just, why don't you tell us a little bit about your role at the National Museum of American History and what you do as a food history curator? We heard your bio, but there's more to it than that.
Sure, absolutely. My job as a curator, probably much like yours, has many different facets. And I guess the only constants are that it's never boring and it's never dull. But our curatorial work involves research, collecting, exhibitions, programming, service, and some administrative work as well. For food history, I toggle between ongoing research on objects in the collections and long-term interests that require field work and oral history recordings. Scotty, I'm not able to move my slides. Is there, sorry folks.
You should be able to just click on that browser that you have that pulled up.
Hey, there we go. Okay, sorry about that. I do collect objects for the museum's permanent collections and have been able to bring some really wonderful objects and archives relating to food and beverage history into the museum over many years. As you know, museum work is intensely collaborative. And so I work closely with other members of our food history team, which you can see here. Dr. Theresa Mcculla with Brewing History. She's the curator for the American Brewing History Initiative. Steve Velasquez, who is a labor and Latino curator. And Dr. Ashley Rose Young, who presents our cooking history programs. Of course, we work also with educators and designers and many other staff members as we do particular projects.
And I'm very interested in the brewing history. We might have to come back to that later.
Absolutely. Many people are. That's often, you know.
I'm not even a beer drinker, but I am interested in the history because it's interesting. But you know, one of the things that whenever I visit the National Museum of American History, there's certain things that I always go and look at first before I then explore things that I haven't seen before. And one of them is Julia Child's Kitchen. I do love that exhibit. So can you tell us about how that became part of the Smithsonian's collection and what its significance has been in telling the story of American food history?
Absolutely. Thank you for visiting the museum and for visiting Julia Child's Kitchen. You're not alone. We know that people make many pilgrimages to view the home kitchen where Julia Child our much beloved cooking teacher, television culinary star, cooked with members of her family and friends for many, many years. From 1961 to 2001, she also tested recipes in this kitchen. She donated the museum the kitchen to the museum in 2001. The story of collecting the kitchen is one of those epic tales that could take up all of our time this evening, but suffice to say that when we heard that Julia Child was leaving her home in Cambridge, Massachusetts, to return to her home state of California in 2001, she was 89 years old when she made this decision. But we did what curators tend to do, which is to ask questions. Specifically about what her intentions were for the things in her kitchen, because we felt that this room, had just a tremendous and a wonderful array of objects that had a lot of meaning to many people. You have to understand that generations of people feel as though this is also their own kitchen because it's so familiar. It's where they may have learned to cook, or where they at least gained an appreciation for food and for cooking by watching Julia on television. Her last 3 cooking shows were actually filmed in this kitchen. Let me just advance here. So we contacted Julia and asked to interview her in the kitchen before she departed. Suffice to say that when we crossed the threshold into this wonderful space, we were really overwhelmed by the sheer number of things, as well as how neat and orderly everything was. She was a curator par excellence in her own kitchen. But we sat around this table in the center of her kitchen and discussed her plans. She had already decided to give some things to members of her family, as well as to really close friends. But for the most part, she was leaving everything behind because she already had a fully equipped kitchen in Santa Barbara. She had been living there seasonally for many, many years. So with that, we started talking to her about what a donation of her kitchen to the museum might look like. Well, Julia was well acquainted with our institution. That's another range of stories that would be wonderful to tell someday. Our conversations revolved around how her kitchen could help the public, inspire the public in the way that she had done for so many years, to really encourage people, to embrace home cooking and to recognize the value of learning, of continuing to learn about new ingredients and techniques and new cuisines, and to really, the joy of sharing the pleasures of the table. When she agreed to donate everything, of course, we were thrilled and realized that, of course, there was a lot of work to be done in order to make that happen. We spent about a day and a half inventorying everything, keying everything to a quick floor plan we made, and coming to really understand the scope and the dimensions of this, what we think of as a very complex artifact. In the end, it took 2 more trips and several more staff members to actually collect about 1,200 separate objects, including cabinetry, appliances, and tools and gadgets. Once everything arrived at the museum, it was about 55 crates and boxes. We spent the bulk of the next year unpacking everything, assessing the condition, cataloging everything. And within, though, that first year, we did open a small gallery, the Bon Appetit exhibit, that featured the kitchen and a few interpretive panels. We were lucky to open the exhibit on Julia's 90th birthday, and we're thrilled that she was able to come to Washington and to participate in that opening and to really see her kitchen right there in the museum. In terms of significance, you asked about significance. I guess I would say that, Julia has had a tremendous impact on so many people, several generations of people. And we see that time and time again with visitors who come to see the kitchen. also, so many people in the culinary fields point to her as their inspiration. She's a great teacher, you know, someone who had mastered French cooking on her own, but someone who delivered her culinary message in a very accessible, often very humorous, and an incredibly memorable way. She was a great teacher. In fact, she referred to herself as a cook and a teacher, not so much as a chef. Having her kitchen then at the museum, we were able to move it to a larger space as the opening experience for a much larger exhibit on food and change in the 20th century.
Well, one of the things, you know, you have the exhibit of Julia Child, but we also mentioned the exhibit that you were co-curator on when I was doing your bio earlier, and that's a major ongoing exhibit about food and foodways. And again, just to remind people, it's called Food Transforming the American Table. So tell us a little bit about creating that exhibit and the interesting stories that are told within it, because that's a much broader story that you're telling there.
Right, right. And here is the entrance to the exhibit. Behind that billboard sign is Julia's Kitchen. So it is the entrance, the opening experience, shall we say, to this exhibition. Food Transforming the American Table really explores the big changes in the post-war period that have had such a tremendous impact on our food, our health, our communities. The idea was to really look at new technologies and innovations that helped build what we now think of as the global food system, while also recognizing the big social and cultural changes, such as the migrations of people, shifting workforce demographics, suburbanization. These are the things that influenced everything, from the widespread availability of in the US of new foods and flavors from around the world to really the rapid availability of, convenient and fast food. So these are huge changes that involve innovations in agriculture, in transportation and communication systems, manufacturing and advertising, retail, supermarkets, the restaurant industry, and of course, labor across all of those sectors. With a story as big as this, we really had to choose case studies and specific stories to represent the larger strands of this big history. So how do you do that? I mean, that's, you know, the challenge of working in a museum is taking big stories and putting them in a building. The gallery has a few big sections, new and improved, which focuses on the technology and food system stories, and resetting the table, which focuses on the big social and cultural changes. So just to give a few examples of the many stories that are in the gallery, for example, you can trace the industrial and centralized production of lettuce from a focus on iceberg in the 1950s, you know, to an astonishing range of conventional and organic greens by the turn of the 21st century. You can also see the impact of, for example, the microwave oven, the World War II technology adapted, you know, for domestic use in the 1950s, you know, and now, you know, this ubiquitous tool that people have, which is used more for reheating than for actual cooking full meals, which was actually the original intent of the manufacturers. The role of snacking and eating on the go, let's just face it, we are a nation of snackers, especially since 1950. And, you know, that's, you know, and I'm guilty as charged. That story is one that encompasses a look at expanded manufacturing processes. It looks at the role of additives and preservatives. And, you know, the resulting, you know, myriad examples of snack foods that deliver those, you know, addictive and wonderful bursts of sugar, salt, and fat, you know, and also a lot of calories. So while there has been, I would say, a shift toward better for you snacks since the early 2000s, we are consuming snacks multiple times a day, and in place of meals more and more. And this is a dynamic that we are looking at also in the exhibition.
And really quickly, Paula, I just wanted to point out to our listeners, I don't know if they can read the can of potato chips, but I love the labeling on it: a healthy food on the alkaline side, yes. The new era, scientifically processed.
Yes. And on the back of it, I think there's something that says like, yes, you won't be able to, put this down. And so it just, again, advertises the fact that this stuff is, highly, highly addictive. What can we say? A counterpoint to these stories is across the gallery on the other side of the big table. And this looks at the counterculture and the political movements, especially in the 1960s and 1970s, that rejected the industrial food system, that was rejecting supermarkets and the industrial food chain. We look at the Back to the Land movement, also movements toward macrobiotic, vegetarian, organic foods, both in terms of both the production of them and the consumption as well as the political messaging that went along with it. The new material that we've added recently, just a few months before the pandemic hit, focuses on food security and food justice, with material on the expansion of school gardens and cooking in schools, including the Edible Schoolyard started by Alice Waters in Berkeley, California, and the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network in Detroit, which is one of several very successful programs in that city. Moving along, we also touch upon food and culture and identity through the lens of migration. There's a new exhibit, a new section of the exhibit called the Migrants Table, and it focuses on individuals who migrated to the United States post-1965 from Ethiopia, Guatemala, China, various places, and who are expressing, their history and culture through food to both build, businesses as well as to build relationships and communities. So we have collected objects and recorded oral histories with individuals and families and feature their own words in this part of the exhibition. Finally, another newish section is, let's see, where is my arrow? Scotty? There it is, okay. Another new section is called On a Diet. And this also reflects the confusing and often contradictory advice we receive from various sources about what we should eat and what we shouldn't eat. If you look at it over time, it's really astonishing to see how things kind of go and come. And it depends on the time that you're looking at to see what was the advice at the time. So if you're confused, so is everyone else. And so we've tried to add the historical lens here to sort of show that as more information is made available, that more advice is provided by different sources, whether it is from government, from the medical establishment, from food writers and authors. We don't leave everybody hanging in the exhibit. Many experts have now taken this broader view that what you eat is only part of good health, that also your exercise, your attention to your mental health, in addition to eating behaviors, is what will make you healthy. So that's kind of a mad dash through most of the, I'd say about half of the exhibit.
And the on a diet section is particularly relevant right now as we're in a new year, and I'm sure there are lots of people who are looking at all those conflicting and contrasting diet advice. I mean, I already know of several people who've talked to me about cleanses, and I'm like, that sounds horrifying.
Well, Julia Child always said everything in moderation, so that's also a good thing to live by.
Before we move on to the next question, can everyone be sure that they have themselves muted, because there's some background noise coming through and I don't know, I'm not sure who it's coming from, but just let's be careful about that, because it was sort of drowning you out a couple of times, Paula.
Oh, okay.
But
I think it's me.
we still have lots to talk about, and I definitely want to come see that new exhibit. Well, not so new, it's been there for a while, but I haven't seen that one myself, so I look forward to coming see it. But I will definitely adhere to the everything in moderation, as I had some dark chocolate today. So, but you know, when you think about collecting for a museum, and you think about collecting food history, I'm sure we're not talking about actual food in the Smithsonian's vaults, because that's a no-no. I know I feel guilty just when I'm having a cough drop when I'm in the museum. So tell us what you're actually collecting when you're talking about collecting for food history.
Sure. You know, you've hit the nail on the head. We don't generally collect organic material, but there are a few exceptions. There's always exceptions. And they have special, you know, very special rules about how we store them. But if you're looking for the history and material culture of food production and distribution, and the everyday practices of preparation and consumption, you know, our museum is just bursting with examples. And I've pulled a couple that might not seem so obvious. Many objects were collected primarily for their connection to something else, and not specifically for food history. For example, the military, like this deck stove, and the eating implements aboard the Revolutionary War gunboat Philadelphia, or politics, like these campaign materials that offer promises involving food security, because of course, you know, whether it's a chicken in every pot, or you know, a full dinner pail, food is an issue for many, many people. The collections in our divisions of medicine and science, and work and industry, culture, community life, and the Archive Center really house thousands of food-related items. Of course, there are menus, there are ads, there are packaging, industrial equipment, like the first bread slicing machine that is on long-term loan to a museum in the Midwest. An array of domestic cookware and containers are in the home and community life collections. My colleagues and I have been researching the material, you know, these collections that have been here for back to the 19th century, some of them. And, you know, discovering that if we apply a food lens to them, that there are many, many more food histories that we can harvest and share with the public. The point is perhaps best illustrated, I think, with a contemporary, a recent example about conceptualizing how we go about collecting food history. Like many other exhibitions or many other museums, we've been thinking about collecting around COVID-19 to document both the collective and the personal histories of Americans grappling with the crisis of 2020. Because, you know, everyone has to eat regularly. Food became a lightning rod in the pandemic, and we've identified those areas that reflect the hardships and the challenges, as well as the innovations surrounding food during the time of COVID-19. So what does that even look like, collecting around a pandemic? You know, my colleagues in medicine and science and in other areas of the museum are doing their collecting, but, you know, in food, we're participating as well. We're looking at objects that relate to safety and security of food workers, from agricultural workers in the field to meatpacking workers, to supermarkets, to restaurant workers. We're also looking at objects related to food and philanthropy. The tremendous need for food banks and other services during this time is quite astonishing. We're also looking at objects relating to consumer safety, the rise of food delivery systems and the like, and as well as the tremendous expansion of of home cooking. You know, Julia really wanted all of us to enjoy home cooking and be in the kitchen, but I'm sure she would not have wanted us to all do so because of a pandemic. But when we're looking at how manufacturers and consumers have responded during the crisis in terms of, you know, manufacturers making more bakeware and cookware, and consumers really getting into cooking in a way that they hadn't, you know, probably, maybe never, but certainly in my case for many years. So we're looking at that phenomenon as well. So you can see that we're integrating food into one of the most significant events thus far in the 21st century. Because we are closed, we haven't been able to bring such items into the museum yet, but we are, you know, ready to do so when things open up.
Well, and you know, you mentioned about how people are baking and cooking more. So I have to ask, did you do a sourdough starter at home?
I did not. I am the one person that did not, but many of my friends and colleagues have, and I'm sure the several people I hope who have tuned in tonight can tell us about their sourdough experiences. Did you?
I did not. I do not need one more thing that I'm responsible to in my life. So when I got offered it, I said no. So, yeah, maybe another time, but not in the middle of this.
Yeah.
So. And Paula, I think some of the sound might be coming from your microphone. So I don't know if there's something up against it that's rubbing it, but just to be careful about that.
I have an external hard drive here, but.
Yeah, so maybe it might be the paper or something. I'm not
okay.
sure, but we're all good, I think.
Right. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. We're going well. You know, you've mentioned a lot of cool things in the collections, and you know, no matter what your interests are, anything in a collection is important and has significance and has a story, and there's always something there that's going to catch your attention. But do you actually have any favorite items in the collection? And if so, what are they and why do you find them so interesting?
Well,
who's your favorite child?
It's one of those, yeah, it's one of those questions that, of course, I always love to answer because it always changes. I mean, you can't work at a place for 30 years and, you know, not just, you know, fall in love every other day with the depth and the breadth of those collections. It's just a privilege to work there and to, you know, to see the history through objects. I did, however, pull a few things out of the hat for tonight. These are two wine bottles, the Cabernet Sauvignon and the Chardonnay, that won first place in both the red and the white categories of the famous 1976 Paris tasting. This was the moment when American California wines in particular were finally recognized by France, by New York, you know, by the world as being superior. And so these are examples of organic material that we do have because the wine is still in these bottles. But these represent, again, this moment when, you know, some California upstart winemakers in the 1960s and 70s, you know, they really perfected the craft, and these bottles sort of stand as a reminder of that event that, of course, was very important for the American winemaking industry. I'm also quite fond of this knife roll donated by Chef Mary Sue Milliken. She was, and her business partner Susan Feniger, were the recipients of the Julia Child Award in 2018. This is an award that is given to worthy individuals or groups by the Julia Child Foundation for Gastronomy and the Culinary Arts. And this knife roll is what Mary Sue took with her to compete on Top Chef Masters in 2011. And I love it because it's just this wonderful array of tools that she used that she wanted to bring with her so that she could, you know, prevail in this contest. But she and her partner are also very important because they were among the first women to own their own restaurants in the early 1980s, and this was in Los Angeles. So the knife roll I love. And then finally, I have chosen the Tortilla Press that was given to the museum by Emilia Ceja. This is a press that she was given for her wedding, and that she has now donated to the museum. But Emilia Ceja came to this country as a young girl. She helped her dad work in some of the vineyards, Napa Valley's most renowned vineyards, and then went on to have a vineyard and winery of her own. And she is the first Mexican-American woman to be the president of a California winery, of an American winery. And so this object, so humble, is one though that represented, her background, but also her interest in food and pairing it with the wines that they made, that they continue to make at Ceja Vineyards, that reflect the foods and flavors from Jalisco, the place in Mexico where her family is from. So if I have to declare on this day, those are the ones that I am declaring.
Well, this just shows you how small the world is. I have just gone back, and in 2016, I was at that food demonstration.
Okay, oh my gosh. Oh my gosh, that's
I know. I when you put the picture up, I was like, I feel like I've seen that before, and I have almost the same picture, but from a different angle.
Oh, that's amazing.
And I got to taste it, and it was delicious. So
great.
Yeah. Small world. So the other question I have is, like, we've talked about food and the history of food and the history of creating food and growing food and that type of thing. But there's also the connection to food to other strands of history. So why is collecting the history of food so important to sort of illuminating these other things?
Mm-hmm. At the museum, we just believe that food is an accessible way into history. It is a platform that the museum uses to make connections across many projects, both within the museum and around the mall. For example, migrations of people and global economic networks can be illuminated by foodways. Tracing the paths of particular ingredients, say from Africa to the Americas. Seeing the convergences of cultures, the impacts of global conflict in dishes prepared at a local farmer's market like this one in Baltimore. Seeing the connections between natural resources and regional foodways in the United States is a very rich topic. And really looking at the impacts of industrial food production on particular landscapes and on the environment and on human bodies. Those are really big topics and strands in history as well. Food also reveals power relationships. Just think about what in history, who has been allowed to own land and to grow food? Who cooked for whom? And under what circumstances? Who was allowed to sell food in markets or to gain funding to establish a food business? Whose food is judged inedible or backward? Who's protected by labor laws? All of these things reflect the power dynamics in much of American history. Food not only provides sustenance in people's lives, but studying food adds crucial elements to our understanding of the everyday experiences of people. Like people have to eat every day, and this is a way to understand those everyday experiences and to learn about those experiences of people through time and in space. I'm going to give an example of this, one that a program that we did just last year, 2019, 2 years ago, on the 150th anniversary of the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad. Here we focused on the laborers, the Chinese men who did the majority of the work despite severe discrimination out in the western part of the United States. Their history includes a strong food component, one that our visitors were not entirely aware of. And we invited Chef Martin Yan to be our guest chef, dynamic chef to be sure. Our food historian, Ashley Rose Young, shaped the conversation around the significant body of knowledge about food and cooking techniques that existed amongst the railroad workers. Also describing the special provisioning that was required to make sure that the railroad workers were fed. Chef Yan, of course, drew a large audience and delighted everyone with his unbelievable and amazing knife skills. But he did so as he was preparing traditional regional dishes that were brought to the United States by the Chinese laborers, and which forever changed dining in the United States. So I guess I just have one more comment on that. Collecting that we've been doing recently reflects the changes that have had a tremendous impact on the health of many Americans. You know, we're just now beginning to understand the dimensions of those impacts. The global food system prioritizes efficiency, convenience, over the production of nutrient-dense foods or environmental sustainability. And finding those stories are critical for our future. And, it's going to be challenging, but we are looking forward to really delving into some of those topics as well.
Well, I look forward to hearing about that because it's fascinating. I mean, all the ways that the different aspects of our society sort of intertwine to create history is very interesting. So, we've talked a lot about the Smithsonian's work, but what about the work that you all do with other museums and organizations across the country and probably beyond that and other places in the world to collect and tell these stories of food history? Do you all do that? And I mean, I'm sure you do that, but what does that look like for you all?
Yes, absolutely. We wish we could do it more. And I guess all of us having to be at home just makes us, miss travel and meeting with colleagues and learning, in different museums and places. But we do work with museums around the country on programs and audience development. In terms of research and collecting, we have reached out to our colleagues, especially for assistance with local contacts and guidance, as well as, to work together in some collaborative way. Our national focus does not preclude our interest in and our commitment to regions and places across the United States. And so it's really a wonderful part of working at the Smithsonian, to be able to think about so many other places and to contact people and perhaps find ways of working together. I'm really hoping that in the years to come, we will find ways of sort of complementing and enriching, our collective work in foodways, to not duplicate, but to expand, the reach and the depth of the work that really needs to be done. So I look forward to that. And, I wonder whether our cooking demonstrations or something in the future, we might be able to work collaboratively, especially on something like that with the regional foodways focus.
Well, and you mentioned the national focus, obviously, of the Smithsonian, but that's again another connection to world history because we are a country of immigrants. So much of that food history has come to us from that part of our history.
Absolutely, no question.
So talking about regional foodways, I mean, the Birthplace of Country Music Museum is here in the South. We're right on the border of Virginia and Tennessee. And food is central to everything, both in the South and in Appalachia. And indeed, one of our programs, the Farm and Fun Time radio show that before the pandemic broadcasted live from the Birthplace of Country Music Museum once a month, always had a heirloom recipe segment where someone from the community or beyond would share the story of a family recipe or a recipe that meant something to them personally. So let's talk a little bit more about the regional foodways. You mentioned them a minute ago, but just how important those are to the work that you're doing.
Absolutely. You know, what is the United States without regions? I come from the upper Midwest, from rural Minnesota. I lived for a few years in Texas, and now for almost four decades here in the Mid-Atlantic. I really do have a very deep and abiding personal interest in an appreciation for regions and regional differences, especially in terms of foodways, but you know, also in music, which is another thing entirely. But at the museum, our collections, you know, aren't always identified in terms of their regional associations. But we do try to update the records when we can verify, you know, a strong regional component. And I hope that we can continue to try to do that. I'll also say that our programming is a wonderful way of, you know, highlighting the regional traditions, regional foodways. And the strands of history, the strands of natural history, and the environment, you know, that inform some of those regional foodways. For example, Food History Weekend 2018, the theme was Regions Reimagined. And one of the speakers, in fact, was Ronnie Lundy, and her marvelous book on Appalachian foodways, Vittles. She spoke on a panel and you know, signed copies of her book, and you know, really brought that sensibility of Appalachian place. You know, her book is so beautiful with those photographs, and then with the recipes as well. It was very, very evocative. We have in the past featured New England regional foodways with clam chowder, a Wampanoag harvest program, you know, baseball food at Boston, in Boston, that sort of thing. And then also the Chesapeake region, where we did a cooking demonstration and featured the Lord Baltimore cake and Southern Maryland stuffed ham, which is from here in the southern part of Maryland. So yes, finding these strands of culture, nature, and you know, history of settlement is really a big part of you know, what we try to do with our food history programming.
So I have to ask, what is Lord Baltimore cake?
Oh, I'll send you actually the recipe it's very rich. It is, the recipe is on our website, so I will send it to you. Yeah.
Okay. In my previous life, I worked in history publishing, and we did a ration book cookery.
Oh, yeah. Oh.
And we had to make all the food ourselves for the photo shoot because we didn't have the budget to have a professional do it. And I made something called a Bible cake, where all of the ingredients were you looking up the Bible verse to find out what the ingredient was.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was wild. It was pretty good, actually. So,
wow.
But, so, you know, we talked a little bit earlier about the programming that you all do. So not just the collecting, not just the creating of exhibits, and the sort of behind the scenes work of recording and preserving this history, but actually going out there and getting people to engage directly with the history and the culture of food through public programming and educational resources. So I'd like to just know a little bit more about some of those things that you all do to get people directly engaged.
Yeah, as I mentioned, food is a platform at the museum, and it connects us virtually to, you know, every other project. We organize conversations and programs around many different kind of food-related themes that have resonated with the public. And we have developed a kitchen facility for bringing these unique food programming opportunities to our audiences. You know, if collecting Julia Child's kitchen was an epic tale, so was getting this kitchen in the middle of our museum built and opened. And so for another time, but we're just delighted to have this facility right in the middle of the museum with a big open plaza for audiences. We've had, 350 people and up at some of our cooking demonstrations. So we opened this in 2015, and this plaza and kitchen allows us to bring in chefs, home cooks, authors, people who can share their history and their story. We've organized programs around certain themes, moments in history, around the civil rights movement, around migration, the Great Migration, around Woodstock, around suffrage. And then we also do programs to dovetail with an object in our collection. Our food historian here frames the program, and she directs the conversation while the guest chef will prepare a recipe or two. We share the recipe with our chef in our cafe, who makes this so that people will be able to purchase the dish while they're in the museum for that day. And it has turned out to be, just a wonderful program that people really look forward to.
And the Smithsonian various museums, their cafes have some extraordinary food and menus. I always like to visit. My favorite is the National Museum of the American Indian for all the different regional native foods that you can get there.
Yeah, in Mitsitam, it's an award-winning cafe. The Sweet Home Cafe in the National Museum of African American History and Culture is also an award-winning cafe. Ours, not so much, but we do try. And I never thought I would say that I missed it, but it's been since March since I've been there, and it would be wonderful to see if to gather with colleagues and friends at the Museum Cafe again sometime soon, I hope.
Well, I mean, that is such a big part of our social life, is being around food, around a table with friends or family.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
we, in addition to the cooking demonstrations, we also do this annual Food History Weekend, which again delves into different topics, innovation, migration. Last year's topic was food justice. Over the course of 2.5 days, we have a gala at which we present the Julia Child Foundation's Julia Child Award. I've included a few images from 2019 when Chef Jose Andres was the recipient of the award. We collected some material from him and his World Central Kitchen, which we had a special display for. And then also we did a panel discussion the next day with all of the previous recipients of the award, including Jacques Pepin. And they were speaking about issues of equity and justice in the food world. So that's part of our Food History Weekend. Once we do that, then we have 2 days of people coming together for conversations, for panels, and for cooking demonstrations. I mean, the whole museum is basically taken over with conversations about that really connect, issues of the current moment that people are concerned with the past and vice versa. So it's been a successful model now for 6 years. And yeah, this year I'm sort of confused because this year, of course, we did it virtually. So we had several conversations and panels, and we had the gala, but we weren't able to gather in this way. Hopefully, and I'm not even going to say it.
Yeah.
We'll get there when we get there.
Yes, let's not jinx it.
Yeah, exactly.
Feels like you just have to go with the flow right now.
Yeah, whatever happens, happens.
So we're going to be wrapping up in just a minute, but I do want to end on a lighter note and a personal note with you, Paula. What is your favorite food or dish, or do you have your own favorite sort of heirloom or family recipe that you want to tell us about?
Yes, well, I come from Minnesota and Scandinavian / German heritage. And my mother grew up on a farm and for several years worked as a cook in a restaurant, and apparently made so many pies that when the restaurant closed, she says never again. But every now and then she would make these marvelous pies. And so, of course, that's near and dear to me. But I think for purposes of this discussion, I'm going to pivot a little bit to talk about regional foodways in my current home for the last 40 years here by the shores of the Chesapeake Bay. And I'm talking about, of course, crab cakes, because nothing in my Minnesota background prepared me for this peppery, sweet, just so, I don't know, tangy combination of ingredients that I found when I was doing my work, field work at Smith Island, Maryland. And so I appreciate it as a dish, a crab cake. But I learned so much about the history and what goes into just making this little crab cake by going out on work boats with watermen to harvest the crabs, by following the crabs to the big industrial steamer at the picking house, to sitting around with these wonderful women picking out crab meat. At Smith Island, they also pick out the claws, and that's a labor of love to pick out the claw meat of a blue crab. And, but they put the claw meat right on top of, you could sort of see it in that picture of the crab meat. And it just adds this beautiful sweetness. So I learned, this from a woman named Janice Marshall, who is still a friend I check in with whenever I can. And, Janice's recipe is a little bit of breadcrumbs, a little bit of mayonnaise, a little bit of Worcestershire, a little bit of mustard, a little salt. But, it's not an exact science. But oh my gosh, just having this marvelous bit of the Chesapeake Bay on a buttery piece of bread in the middle of summer is just, divine. Maybe I'm thinking about this because it's cold in January and I'm, anticipating the summer, but there's really nothing like a Maryland crab cake.
Well, I too am a fan of crab cake, so I hear you for sure. And now you've made me very hungry. Actually, that description has definitely made me want one. But I am a bit landlocked here, so I won't have one of those anytime soon.
Yeah, no kidding.
Well, thank you, Paula. This has been a fascinating conversation with you, and there's so many other questions that I have, but we will wind up the conversation part because I do want to open up 2 questions. And I know we've gotten a few that have come through in the chat and other ways. So I'm going to turn it over to Scotty, who is going to sort of moderate those questions for us because he has access to all the different venues that the questions can be coming in. And then we'll sort of tackle a few of those and see if anyone else wants to put anything, just drop it in the chat and we will get to your question because we would love to hear what you have to say about the topic of food.
All right, so our first question is from Sarah Beth White, and her question is, do you work with other museums within the Smithsonian on the ways food may be or may intersect with their content? And she mentions in particular the Air and Space Museum with astronaut ice cream.
Everyone's favorite treat.
I know. It's like the other museums have the cafes and then there's the astronaut ice cream. What can we say? We have not worked much with the Air and Space Museum, but we have worked definitely with the African American Museum of History and Culture, as well as the National Museum of the American Indian. In our virtual Food History Weekend last year, we had some food justice galleries, and both the American Indian Museum, African American History and Culture, and the Art Museum, Smithsonian Art Museum, provided content about food justice. And that was just really exciting to me because it was, again, curators going into their collections and saying, okay, I'm putting on a food justice lens. What am I seeing? And it was just a wonderful combination of artifacts. We also work with the Natural History Museum. We do a Earth Summit, and 1 year they were doing something about sustainability. And so 3 of us went over and spent a Saturday afternoon with teenagers from around the country, or around the metro area, who were grappling with issues of sustainability. So yes, we do work with other museums when we can. And again, it's one of the great things of working at the Smithsonian is to have, you know, so many colleagues, so many collections, so many possibilities.
You mentioned working with the Natural History Museum and sustainability, and I just wanted to follow up and ask a quick question about that before we move on to the next one. Is, you know, there's some interesting, you know, there's the issues of how the way that we are sort of mass producing food and what that means for losing heirloom varieties of food, and also are we causing some foods to head towards extinction. So I can imagine that that could be a really interesting route for research in the future, because it's something that I know worries me slightly when I think about seedless watermelons and things like that.
There are seed banks there, and there are people who are working diligently in different parts of the country. We too look forward to investigating this with our colleagues at the American Indian Museum in particular, but others as well, because there are so many organizations that, you know, during the COVID-19, you know, when people had to, you know, kind of think smaller, you know, that they did discover, you know, the beauty of local produce, and, you know, people who are working at a smaller scale locally to preserve some of these heirloom varieties.
And I think, do we have any other questions? I think we have a couple more in the chat, Scotty, am I right? I haven't kept up with it as much as you have, but I think I saw a couple come through.
I don't, let me see. I've got a couple more for sure, but I didn't see any in the chat.
There's one from Jessica Carbone and also from Carol Jernigan that has just come through.
Okay, yeah, that one just came through. Let me find it.
So from Jessica, she says, wonderful presentation, Paula. And we also had someone who signed off who said that it was an amazing presentation and thank you. But Jessica wanted to know more about one of the new objects you showed in the food exhibition. The large dark blue panel in the Food for the People display about vegetarian cooking, among other things, that was for sale. What is that object and how did you come to collect it?
Sure. Hi, Jess. Jessica Carbone worked with our food history team, and it launched our cooking programs when it was called Food Fridays, because of course we thought we could do a cooking demonstration every single Friday, one right after the other. Now we do it monthly, but Jess is a wonderful food scholar and colleague. Jess, that panel is from the Pike Place Market in Seattle. And it was a big menu board at Pike Place. And we collected it from them. It was so big, we only had room for one of the panels in the exhibition, but it was one of the early restaurants that was offering a vegetarian cuisine, or vegetarian sandwiches, vegetarian offerings. And this was the new and improved Pike Place Market in 1970. So that's what that wonderful object is. I wish we could have all 3 of the panels together.
Yeah, and then we have one more in the chat that came through from Carol, is that Jernigan? Do you resource other regional Smithsonian affiliates to create the food platform for history?
research with other affiliates, is that?
Resource with regional Smithsonian affiliates to create food platforms for history is what the question is.
Okay. I'm sorry, I'm not quite understanding. Are you asking if we would come to other regional?
I wonder if she's asking about whether you turn to any of the Smithsonian affiliate museums out there because of their connection already to the Smithsonian to help with some of the collecting and the stories you're telling through the food platform for history. I think that would be what she means.
Okay. You know, we have spoken with some affiliates, certainly probably, you know, not as many as would have wonderful collections and stories to share. But again, I think I look forward to being able to work with affiliates, especially in programming and, you know, with our cooking demonstrations. I think that that's a particularly rich area to pursue.
Well, and like you said, the idea of regional foodways could fit very well into that in the future when it's okay to travel and it's okay to be with people again. Right. A really interesting program idea.
Yeah, absolutely. For Food History Weekend this year, in 2020, we did experiment with a virtual cooking demonstration, and you know, worked with, for example, a wonderful cook a chef in a Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma, and she made sumac crusted trout in her kitchen, and you know, she was so wonderful. She you know, had her daughter film her gathering the sumac and bringing it into the kitchen. And then just set up a couple of, you know, cameras with her computer and her telephone and, you know, ended up doing a marvelous cooking demonstration. And we just realized that, you know, with technology, we can probably do a lot more of this. You know, I'll also say one quick thing that a lot of people are doing cooking demonstrations remotely, and you know, there's just a lot of content out there. You know, what we really try to do is to base what we're doing in the Smithsonian collections and in our research, so that it really has that strong Smithsonian and museum and history base. And so each of the programs is you know, curated to a certain degree, but we know that if we can frame these questions and help, you know, co-select certain recipes, that, you know, cooks working in their kitchen and just doing what they do, you know, is a way of bringing that content to a lot more people.
Yeah. Yeah, there has, I mean, it's been sad to have to change things so radically, but at the same time, that virtual element does give you the opportunity to reach such a wide audience, which is always exciting and such a big part of the purpose of what museums are doing.
Right, right. It's absolutely phenomenal to think of how many more people can be reached in this way. You know, it's too bad that we have to have a pandemic to learn these things, but you know, now that we know it, we can do more hybrid programming, you know, and you know, test those assumptions a little bit more.
So we have two more that came in online. The first one is, my ears perked up when you mentioned a curator focused on brewery or brewing history.
Yes.
Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, the American Brewing History Initiative. I can't believe I glitched on it. American Brewing History Initiative was started. It's funded by the Brewers Association, which is an organization of American craft and home brewers. And the initiative, it really has hired a historian who has spent the last 3 years doing oral histories with home and craft brewers around the country. Speaking of regional activities, and she has been documenting really the the growth, the tremendous growth and expansion of brewing in the United States, and the enormous creativity of the people who are involved in making craft beer. She hasn't been able to do her field trips this year, but has been doing Zoom interviews. And she has also started a collection of objects documenting this, the growth of home and craft brewing in the United States. This collection then augments one of our older Smithsonian collections of brewing history that was predominantly made up of material from a former brewmaster working out of Baltimore, who also collected material from various breweries on the East Coast. But Theresa Mcculla is the historian who is leading this project. And she has curated a marvelous collection of material and archives and oral histories about this wonderful growth of American craft beer.
It's funny about that. I remember several years ago a Smithsonian job posting, and it was like, "Do you like beer? Do you want to travel the world?" I was like, "Are they targeting me?" Because I feel like they are.
That was that job, and
that must have been that job.
That was that job because my phone number was listed on that job announcement, and I cannot tell you how many thousands of people were interested in that job. Yeah, and I heard from many of them. So
I didn't even entertain it. I was like, so many people are going to apply for that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's awesome. And we did get another one more in the chat. Mark Tchaikovsky asks, what does the 2035 Pandemic in American Life NMAH exhibit look like? So the Natural Museum of the exhibit. I'm not sure.
Looking ahead to 2035 when we do an exhibit about the pandemic, is that okay?
Well, got it in quotations, but yeah. So what does the 2035? So yeah, in the future, what do you think from this year would be included?
Yeah, that's hard. It's hard to say. Like I said, we do have people who are speaking with potential donors and asking potential donors to put aside material, from the medical science perspective, the vaccine development perspective, from the food history perspective, from the economic hardship perspective. That's when we can finally bring more material into the museum and also bring in the oral histories. My colleagues and I have been conducting oral histories, also collecting digital material related to the pandemic. So we're amassing it. This is what it takes to do those kinds of exhibits, is you have to just start working and bringing things in. We do have a project that I would mention in our resource page. Let me just put up our resource page. In terms of Share Your Story of 2020, that is a site where we are collecting stories from people who want to share their experiences during this tumultuous time. And so you can follow that link, and that's another way that we are collecting material for to tell this story in 2035. And Rene, Cooking Up History, follow that link and you will find a Lord Baltimore cake. We have all of the recipes.
Check that out.
Yeah, we have all the recipes. I have the recipe, on my computer here, but it would mess up our program for me to access it. But
I'm gonna have to research that too, just because there's an obscure '70s band called Sir Lord Baltimore, and I'm sure they're connected somehow. I'm not sure what that is, but
Well, there's a Lord Baltimore and a Lady Baltimore cake. So
yeah.
Lady Baltimore cake being, I think, more popular than Lord Baltimore, but these are the things.
Well, and Mark did follow up. He said specifically food items in a future exhibit. So,
oh, okay.
When he talked about the future and I mean the pandemic connection and food items, I thought especially of, and I know this is something that started before the pandemic, but there's been a real proliferation of those food subscription.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, box food.
Yeah, food subscription sort of that you can do where you learn where you're cooking at home or getting the food sent directly to you. And I wonder how much that has been influenced by the pandemic, because I know they were there beforehand, but it really feels like there's a huge amount more in the last year, it feels like.
Yeah, we actually collected from several of those companies. Actually, we collected from people who use those, because the stories that we would get from people who use, whether it's, one company or the other. So we have some of that material in the new exhibition, or the refreshed food exhibit. And, it was really interesting to see the impact of that, why people would use those subscriptions, what the demographic was, and in a lot of cases, people said, we use this not only because, it's easy and we get a good meal, but it also taught me how to cook, what you need in order to cook, and also how to shop, how to think about ingredients in a way that for a dish that would help you stock your pantry, and go and get fresh fruit and vegetables. So it really had these different dimensions that we were really interested in documenting. In terms of food and COVID, we have been talking to restaurant people, some restaurants that have closed permanently. And so we will be collecting some material from those restaurants. The digital material about rules and regulations. Oh my gosh, the signage for what you can do and what you need to do and the safety precautions and all of this, which is, of course, just sometimes it's like information overload, but it's critical for people to try to stay safe. And so, like Jose Andres, and he had a whole large poster called Masky. And, he had this cartoon character called Masky, and Masky did this and this and this. And it was just a really easy way to see what the restaurant workers had to do and, how they were going to protect consumers who were coming to pick up food. So that's another angle. The philanthropic end of things is really astonishing. And so we have some documentation of that in terms of photography, some from places in Detroit, San Francisco, and Texas. And then, in terms of just the cooking end of things, kind of going back to that, I did get an offer of, the last yeast pack that, and so I called the person who had offered this, and it was just such a lovely story, that, he's hanging on to the last yeast pack that his sister had sent to him from Queens because he was trying to make a certain type of bread. And, it was just a marvelous story. At the same time, we have, the manufacturers. We have a large collection from the Nordic Ware Company in Minneapolis of cookware, bakeware. And I thought, what is happening with that? And they said, we have never seen anything quite like this. And so we will be interviewing them about what their, the increase of manufacturing that, they were not expecting, but of course they were, scrambling to meet and to provide cookware for people who needed it because they were, staying at home. Some of the other issues having to do with food security and food justice, the ways in which people have been so creative in bringing together, the out of work chefs and the people who are food insecure, is just one of those, one of those wonderful things that you realize this is a crisis, and you have two groups of people who are both suffering, and finding a way of bringing them together so the chefs can cook, and so they can provide food for people in need, and then develop relationships with different people in different communities is, a byproduct of food in the time of COVID-19. Yeah. So
there's a lot of inspiring stories there, but it's so many challenging stories too.
Unbelievable. Yeah. I mean, when you see, and then, again, for worker protections, and you see, some of the ways in which, it took a while for people to be fully protected in some of the workplaces, it's just, again, a story that relates to the food supply.
Yeah, there's some interesting legal history that's going to be coming to play in that.
Yeah. And distribution, the whole distribution networks, what that looked like. And, we've all seen the pictures, we've all experienced, the empty shelves back in March and April. And, the food distribution system is still, kind of by getting back up to speed. There are a lot of products that are not produced, that different companies have cut way back on, the number of things that they're doing.
Yeah.
So
that actually, our last question was about food security, and you answered that. So.
Well, I'll just add one thing about for our Food History Weekend in October, our virtual. We had people from all over the country in a conversation, and people had different models for addressing the concerns in their communities. These are organizations that had a system, and it was all ready to go. But as the executive director for Martha's Table here in Washington, D.C. said, oops, I forgot to budget for a pandemic. And, suddenly everything, shifted. And, that story of people, having to shift quickly to meet the incredible and expanding needs is a story that is absolutely worth documenting and absolutely worth reminding people of in the future.
Yeah, agreed.
Well, Paula, again, this has been wonderful. I think it's been such an interesting talk. We've gotten lots of positive comments in the chat, and I've gotten a few texts from people who I know who are watching with positive comments. So
great, thank you.
People have enjoyed it, and I wanted to thank you so much for being here with us. And certainly we could have talked for much longer, but that was a wonderful beginning conversation into the impact of food in history, and also the wonderful work that the Smithsonian is doing to record that history for us. Thank you for being here with us.
It was my pleasure. I really enjoyed it. I apologize if my little home setup, made some crackly noises.
That's okay. We're all living through those moments.
Yeah. But I really appreciate this opportunity, and I appreciated the chance to learn about your museum because country music is something near and dear to my husband. And I think I was telling you that, Jimmy Rogers and the Carter family and Jim and Jesse and Ira and Charlie, all of those people are part of our soundscape here at home. And so as soon as we can, we're going to drive down to Bristol. And
well, yes, and we will love to show you the museum and show you some of the wonderful foodways here in Bristol and in this area. The other thing I wanted to say is a huge thank you to the Smithsonian. It is through them that we were able to have this program, and it's specifically through the American Women's History Initiative. You know, as an affiliate museum, we get so many resources and so much support and advice from the Smithsonian, but it's really wonderful to have these tangible programs that we can share with our community and our wider audiences. So I send a big thank you out to the Smithsonian. I also send a big thank you out to everyone who participated tonight and was here with us, and hopefully you enjoyed the talk as much as we did. Paula, if you don't mind to go forward on your slide once, I wanted to talk about some upcoming things. We have, like I said earlier, this is the inaugural virtual speaker series tonight that we have started, and our next one is actually on Tuesday, February 2nd at 7 p.m. It is Before Coal Miners' Daughters and Many Colored Coats, Pioneering Women in Country Music, with our very own bopping Bailey George from Radio Bristol on the Honky Tonk Hit Parade. Again, that is free, but pre-registration is required, so put that on your calendars. We would love to see you back for that program. And then on Tuesday, March 2nd at 7 p.m., we have Black in Appalachia, uncovering and sharing regional Black narratives with our speakers, Alona Norwood and William Issam II. Again, free, but pre-registration required. And then we will be having these speaker series each month, so keep an eye out for the ones that we'll be having following those two. And also, please keep an eye out in your inboxes, because we will be sending through a survey. We would love to have your feedback on tonight's program. But we'll end there. I'll say thank you once again to everyone, and specifically to you, Paula. It's been wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.